Abbiamo adesso padre Filomeno Jacob, che è un antropologo del campo che insegna qua in Gregoriana, insegna l'antropologia. So now we have Father Filomeno Jacob, who teaches in this university. He's a trained field anthropologist, so he's going to lead us in issues of global governance, finance, and market challenges. So over to you.
Thank you. Buonasera. Okay. So it's about global governance, finance, and market challenges. I have 5 points here. The first one will be on global governance in action. The second is what is global governance? The third one is the architecture of global financial governance. What are the issues? And then trends in global governance. The first one, a few preliminaries. The issue of governance has become a major topic in international relations, geoeconomics, and geopolitics. Realism is a key ingredient, but a constructivist idealism is required. I will approach the issue from the point of view of political economy. To introduce the topic, I'll go back to anthropologist Marcel Mauss, who conceived society as a historical project of humanity, whose limits were extended to become ever more inclusive. The point of his influential little book, The Gift, is that society cannot be taken for granted as a pre-existent form. It must be made and remade, sometimes from scratch. Heroic gift exchange, for which heroic leadership is needed, was designed to push the limits of society outwards. Without exchange, there is no humanity nor society. The exchange is powered by generosity, self-interested for sure, but not in the way associated with Homo economicus. Human institutions everywhere are founded on the unity of individual and society, freedom and obligation, self-interest and concern for others. Modern capitalism and economics rest on an unsustainable nailed to one of these poles only, and it will take a social, cultural, and political revolution to restore the values and ensure a humane balance. The physical reality of currency provided one anchor of money's stability. Money often appears to be exclusively just a means of exchange, linking buyers and sellers, but it always introduces a third party to this bilateral exchange, and that is the community. But the essence of money is what people use it for in society, within a community based on shared values and social institutions. This second anchor of money's stability would be progressively revealed as a result of money becoming more insubstantial. In the philosophy of money, Simmel argued that money's functionality would eventually be emancipated from its substance, metals or paper. The digital revolution has just accelerated and cheapened electronic transfers. Now, global governance in action. I'm going to give an example of how global governance is functioning at the moment. You have the WTO's Trade Facilitation Agreement. Global financial governance is already happening everywhere around the world. The UN Global Survey on Trade Facilitation and Paperless Trade Implementation 2017 is one example of such a global governance in action. The survey was conducted between January and July 2017, and the global report was released on 1 November 2017. The survey covers 120 countries and 47 measures related to the WTO's Trade Facilitation Agreement, paperless trade, and inclusive development. The United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, UNCITRAL, is a subsidiary body of the UN General Assembly that improves the legal framework for international trade by preparing international legislative texts for use by states in modernizing the law of international trade and non-legislative texts for use by commercial parties in transaction negotiations. UNCITRAL legislative texts address international sale of goods, commercial dispute resolution, including both arbitration and conciliation, electronic commerce, insolvency, cross-border insolvency, transport of goods, payments, procurement and infrastructure development, and security interests. Now, laws on these electronic transactions. You have the Model Laws on Electronic Commerce 1996, Model Laws on Electronic Signatures 2001, United Nations Convention on the Use of Electronic Communications in International Contract, and the UNCITRAL law, Model Law on International Commercial Arbitration, which was initially adopted in 1985, revised in 2006. Now, on the Model Law on Electronic Transferable Records, the UN Commission on International Trade Law adopted this model law on July 17. The model law legally enables the use of electronic transferable records that are functionally equivalent to transferable documents and instruments, including bills of lading, bills of exchange, promissory notes, and warehouse receipts. The use of electronic transferable records brings a number of benefits to electronic commerce, including speed and security of transmission, as well as the possibility of reusing the information contained therein. The electronic transferable records are particularly relevant for certain business areas such as transport and logistics and finance. Their use allows for the establishment of a fully paperless trade environment. It sets forth the requirements for the use of an electronic transferable record. It defines control as the functional equivalent of possession of a transferable document or instrument. It provides guidance on the assessment of the reliability of the method used to manage the electronic transferable record, on change of medium, and on cross-border aspects, among other items. This is international. What happens nationally? There must be a national trade facilitation body, which is an institutional arrangement, national, that brings together relevant diverse parties with interest in trade facilitation, both government and private sector. And it provides a mechanism for identifying problems and implementing measures to streamline trade procedures. Then it is happening in some countries, something called a national single window. Now, the national single window is a customs portal where traders can submit all documents relating to trade and can access all relevant information regarding trade via a single electronic gateway. The portal connects the customs authority with all government agencies that deal with the movement of people, goods, including tax, immigration, quarantine, health, transport, agriculture, fisheries, foreign affairs, and central banks. It is a fairly new and innovative approach to border processing and clearance. This is the concept. You have the ministries, the customs, tax agents, traders, port authorities, banks, all connected in order to do everything at the same time and help each other process goods. It saves time and saves money. What is global governance? After this example of how things work out there. Governance, there are so many definitions, but to bring the issue under control, governance means the process of decision making and the process by which decisions are implemented. And government is one crucial facet of governance in the authoritative allocation of values and social order. In other words, governance is a combination of formal and informal ideas, values, rules, norms. At the national level, governance consists of informal networks of coordination plus the authoritative and coercive capacity of government, which together, usually and predictably, exert effective authority and control. At the international level, governance is the entire story. Governance minus government, which means too little capacity to ensure compliance with collective decisions, although with more order, stability, and predictability than one might expect. Global governance is understood as the way in which global affairs are managed. As there is no global government, global governance typically involves a range of actors, including states, as well as regional and international organizations. Global governance, in other words, is the sum of laws, norms, policies, and institutions that define, constitute, and mediate relations between citizens, societies, markets, and the states in the international system, the wielders and objects of the exercise of international public power. What is the role of the states in this quite chaotic situation? The world has witnessed the erosion of the state's sovereignty. However, the notion of global governance does not exist in isolation from the world that is attempting to understand and to improve. The fundamental units of the system, the sovereign states, are here to stay. So the states will always be there, I guess, for the foreseeable future. And they are still organized essentially to pursue their perceived vital interests in a world without meaningful overall central authority. So state sovereignty remains the core of international relations. However, the meaning of that sovereignty is continually changing, and the leverage and significance of a host of non-state actors is growing in observable ways. We also have non-state actors, markets. There is a proliferation in numbers and importance of non-state actors from both civil society, private sector, and the market, as well as transnational and transgovernmental networks of various types. There is an ever more crowded governance stage. Call it multi-level governance, multiple multilateralisms, and multiple stakeholders. That is reality, and not merely academic jargon. That is the state of global governance in 3-4 minutes. Now, the next is the architecture of global financial governance. The international system is here to promote peace, development, stability, and progress. Now, we heard this morning that is not actually happening very soon. Why? This is where we should find ourselves. You have the World Bank, you have the WTO, you have all these institutions that determine the present and, to a certain extent, the near future of the international community. We heard this morning that who has economic power has political power. And sometimes we hear people say that it's economics running the show. Well, I would say that is partially true, because the other side of the coin is also true. It's politics that determine the economics. It is politicians who run the show here. They are the ones who decide on what to do, how to do things next. At the Pittsburgh Heads of State Summit in September 2009, the G20, you see G20 there, pushed for an extensive reform of the international financial regulations with the overall aim to generate strong, sustainable, and balanced growth. The FSB, you see FSB there, Financial Stability Board, was established to make international financial standards setting more accountable and legitimate by involving more countries in the process and by making deliberations more transparent and reflecting the views of a broader number of stakeholders. But the story comes from back a few years back in '62. In '62, the advanced countries, G10, came together and they met regularly at the Bank for International Settlements, you see BIS there, in '62, to coordinate central bank policy and to organize lending to each other among the developed countries. Through the general arrangements to borrow, 2 committees were formed based at the BIS. The Euro Currency Standing Committee, also known as the Markets Committee, to monitor and assess the operations of the newly established euro currency markets. This committee later became the Committee on Global Financial System, GCFS. You see it there. It now deals with broader issues of systemic risk and financial stability. The second committee was the Committee on Payment and Settlement Systems, CPSS, formed in 1990 to negotiate and set standards to support the continued functioning of payment and settlement systems. Now, this is a long story, and I have only half an hour. So, I will leave it at that, and I would conclude with this. It works for the advanced economies. The coordination works very well. It has the best systems to ensure that the economy works well for their peoples. But it doesn't work for the rest. The rest are left outside. The Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, you see they are all here, IMF, World Bank, with all the committees that help them. The instruments to ensure that everything is technically correct, everything is transparent, everything is professional. They have established near universal regimes to coordinate and regulate the economic, monetary, and trade policies of their member countries. The WTO now has 153 members, and the IMF has 187 member states. But decision-making and agenda setting in these organizations remain largely in the domain of developed countries and a few large developing countries. The WTO, 190 plus countries are now members. Among them, there are also the least developed countries who are protected, and I would say that is true to a certain extent, through ease in the implementation of the WTO rules and regulations. They receive technical assistance to set up and organize national economies. They want to teach, and we want to learn how to do that, to grow their real economy, set up VAT, strengthen their productive sector, land, labor resources, get people out of poverty, and be capable of a level playing field, non-protectionist connection to the international market. If poor countries, least developed countries, want to enter the international market, they'll have to do a few things properly. The WTO regulates international trade by liberalizing economies and building the financial architecture of the international economy with common rules to be implemented both internally as well as externally, and to be validated by the international scrutiny and assessment. So we have to do things inside and work with the international community according to the rules agreed within the WTO. Now, there is something called the Washington Consensus, which reflect the liberal principles of neoclassical economics, providing a powerful and coherent set of policy prescriptions centered on privatization, trade and financial liberalization, and fiscal conservatism. Well, a few things there, 10 at least. Fiscal discipline, reordering public expenditure priorities away from non-merit subsidies towards public goods. Tax reform, liberalized interest rates, competitive exchange rate, trade liberalization, of which one example I gave you at the beginning. Liberalization of inward foreign direct investment, privatization, deregulation, and strong protection of property rights. Now, lending conditionalities and political pressure diffuse this policy paradigm around the developing world and contributed to the perception that economic policy could be standardized into a best practice. Context and conjuncture is left out of the equation. You have the prescription, but you don't think about the people and the history of the countries you are dealing with. Now, and that is all a question of power, global power relations. The World Bank and the IMF have now become the dominant actors shaping the form, the content, and the rules of the game within the process of globalization. Who controls these two institutions controls the world, plus the WTO. Today, new powers, despite the West's power, the power of the Western countries, new powers are emerging in this institutionalized order, or disorder. New powers have changed the power relations that underpinned global governance. They are also economically, politically, and culturally different from the established Western powers. The great power club of systemically significant countries has become more diverse, but international institutions are sticky. It's not easy to deal with the World Bank. And existing institutions accord privilege to strong established powers and largely reflect their preferences and ideas. As a result, new conflicts are emerging that are generating novel forms of institutional adaptation and change. There are regional organizations like the African Union, the Organization of the American States, the ASEAN, to promote regional cooperation in economic, financial, and trade matters, and have made progress in integrating developing and emerging market countries into their decision-making structures. One example is the BRICS, is the biggest. And they have come together to put things like the new development bank or the contingent reserve arrangement and the Chinese-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in the context of the Chinese One Belt, One Road project, which cannot be explained simply in terms of the emerging powers' thirst for power or strategic advantage, although this cannot be dismissed. When the AIIB was established, some Western countries were told by the United States not to join because they were joining China. And yet, they did join. The United Kingdom went against the United States to join this bank. Despite acknowledging a multiplicity of actors, agents, regional bodies, most definitions and conceptualizations of global governance are remarkably Western-centric and thus limited to and controlled by Western powers. They assume the continued dominance of the West and exclude or marginalize regional actors. While the role of the civil society or global civil society in global governance has received plenty of attention, the role of the non-Western states and regional institutions has received far less attention. And yet, many non-GD countries have incorporated the Basel standards into their regulatory frameworks for a variety of reasons, including to strengthen the soundness of their commercial banks, raising their credit rating in international financial markets, and achieving a universally recognized international standard. If you don't do it, you will be out of the international community. For example, as a condition for obtaining a bank license, all G10 countries require foreign banks to demonstrate that their home country regulators have adopted the Capital Accord and other international agreements. International reputation and market signals are also important in creating incentives for non-G10 countries to adopt the Capital Accord. Now, some issues there. The first one is legitimacy. The second is the new international economic order, which was mentioned before this morning, and international institutional reforms. Legitimacy. The international financial institutions mentioned above, they have accomplished a lot in developing international regulatory standards. But all that you saw in that slide, they are not entities with separate legal personality created by states. They are informal association of state representatives and or professionals that address specific problems or to identify issues of concern that have cross-border or international effect. Now, the Basel Committee, for example, claims that the legitimacy of the international standards that it adopts derives from a communique issued by the G7 heads of state in 1998 that encouraged emerging economies to adopt strong prudential standards and effective supervisory structures. That doesn't appear to be enough. International law consists of both important substantive norms and principles, so-called material legitimacy, as well as fair decision-making processes and ways of reaching conclusions and opinions on contentious issues, the so-called procedural legitimacy. Now, T. Frank says, legitimacy is a property of a rule or rule-making institution which itself exerts a pull toward compliance on those addressed normatively, because those addressed believe that the rule or institution has come into being and operates in accordance with generally accepted principles of right process. That means it's imperative to develop universal institutions that are really universal and procedures that are accepted by everybody to ensure legitimacy. Briefly on this one, a long time ago in 74 or 75, the United Nations passed a resolution 63189 to demand international justice in economic matters. You can go to the websites and read more about it. An international order, economic order, based on equal participation in the decision-making process, interdependence, mutual respect, solidarity, and cooperation among all states. All of this is available at the UN, and yet it's not put into practice. What we need, therefore, is the rule of law that applies to every country equally, and the principle of democracy, which should be upheld by the international institutions. We need reforms. The Financial Stability Board has done a lot to support the Western economies, but has not yet demonstrated that it is a meaningful institution for enhancing the macro-prudential focus of international financial regulation. Its efforts so far do not inspire confidence that more adequate macro-prudential measures are being adopted at the international level. So we need international good governance. I'm told I have to finish, so I will finish. Just 5 points. The first one, the possible reforms. There is a thing in international law or international relations that is called the public commons. Everything that is public that belongs to all of us, like the seas, the water. Now, in finance, what is that? We need reforms in the publicness of decision-making, not in secret by some agencies, by some countries, to determine the fate of everybody. We need publicness in net benefits, the benefits of the economic management to benefit everybody. Publicness of consumption. What is publicness of decision-making? Financial markets affects us all, whether poor or rich. Thus, the new international norms need to be taken into account for the re-regulation of finance. Joseph Stiglitz said, those who are affected by the financial crisis should also have a say about its reforms. The reality is those who are affected by the failure of regulation do not have a voice. We need a multilateral framework in which there is a process fairness among politics, business, and civil society. This also means that human rights, human security, ethnic and women's rights should play a role. From national sovereignty to responsible sovereignty, publicness in net benefits. Despite the massive increase of international financial transactions since 1990s, the distribution of net benefits has mostly gone to the private actors. We need some change there. And finally, publicness of consumption. As the financial crisis has demonstrated, consumption was restricted by new financial products which normal citizens could not evaluate. Non-excludability has been violated by normal citizens since they were excluded from safe products. Finance is too important to leave it to financial experts only. Financial crisis demands a reorientation of the rules of the game of global governance of finance. We need to focus on process fairness and not only on the output fairness. Financial markets are not private goods, which are excludable and rival, but part of the public domain to be used by all citizens. Finance, too, has to be fair, just, and democratic. Thank you.